All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, thank you so much to Julien and Frank, who are our first corporate visits, virtual corporate visit presenters. And so we're really thankful for you guys taking the time out of your day to talk with us in this way. And thank you to all of our students and alumni for being here and showing up. I want to also thank Randall Schober. Randall actually was the one who introduced me to both Julien and Frank completely separately before they had merged their companies, and then they ended up merging their companies. Both Julien and Frank have been really involved actually with PLNU students in the MBA program. They've been speakers in Randall's class, and Julien is really generous with sharing knowledge and tools and information. And Frank actually was one of our field experience clients 1 year and worked with the daytime MBA students in the field experience client, and it's a field experience client. So thank you guys both for being here. This is our first one. We did the one with Lynn Reeser, more of a webinar style, and we had you guys locked down and submitting questions via chat. Julien and Frank are awesome. They're quick on their feet, and so they're willing to respond to your guys' questions as we go through. So I'm going to turn it over to them. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. This is fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Looking forward to it.
So I know that we got a few questions ahead of time, just around kind of our history, how we got started in our business, how we merged, why we became a B Corp. Those were kind of the main questions that we got. But if you have other questions, maybe just along the way, feel free to drop them in chat, and then Frank and I will take a look as we're both kind of sharing a little bit. But if it sounds good, maybe we each start with just like 2-3 minutes on kind of how we got started in the business. Does that sound like a way to go? Cool. So I can start. So I graduated in the early 2000s, had studied a little bit of graphic design, computer science, kind of a little bit of everything, business and economics. But at the time, the real estate market was booming, so I decided that was probably my best bet. Kind of offered a lot of what I was looking for around flexibility, being my own boss, unlimited potential, meeting new people, helping people. So I did that. I got an internship in Rancho Santa Fe, worked for one of the top agents, got my license, and as soon as I got my license, like the market completely tanked in 2005. So it didn't make any sense to try to sell houses to people. So I was just kind of pivoting and leaning on what I knew how to do, which was a bit of marketing and design. Started helping agents in my office. So I was doing, offering up photography and web design and kind of anything to anyone that was willing to pay me at the time. And before I knew it, I built myself into a little kind of consulting business and grew it and became known in at least that little community as the kid in the office that would help people out. So I got to the point where I had like 30-40 hours of billable work, but then also like another 30 or 40 hours of non-billable work that goes along with running a business, accounting, administration, sales and marketing, and just realized that, I was working 70, 80 hours, not making the money that I would hope that I would make. And that if I wanted to really grow something, it had to be bigger than myself in my own capacity. So at that point, I decided to create an agency. I decided to call it Organic SEO. I was really dedicated at that point to helping cause and purpose-driven businesses grow, and focused on building a brand and hiring. I bootstrapped it. I didn't have any investors or partners at the time, so it was a very slow, kind of methodical process. Getting that next client, which allowed me to hire that, get that first intern, which was somebody from Loma, actually, that is still an employee today. So they've been with me for 11 years. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, just very slowly and steadily grew the business, got to, overcame that first couple hurdles of hiring 1 or 2 people and trying to formalize the business, and got to another hurdle of like 10 plus people, which just adds another layer of complexity with needing to add some kind of layers of middle management and things of that nature. So yeah, got to that point, and that took me quite a while. It took me, 4 or 5 years to get to the point of, 10 plus people, and continued to grow by myself. And I'll let Frank tell his story before we talk about the merger journey. But at that point, a couple of years ago, Frank and I met through a mutual kind of business organization called Entrepreneurs Organization. And we went to lunch, had some great conversations, and recognized what we could do together if we merged. So I'll talk about that a little later, but Frank, you want to give your story?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. It's always fun to engage with this group and try to give back wherever we can. So my story goes back to the late 90s. And in the late 90s, I worked in retail. I was a retail manager. And in the store that I was one of the managers in, there was this computer department. And there was point of purchase material that was coming in, and it was saying things like the information superhighway is coming. And so I was kind of like, oh, what's that? And so I started asking my cohorts there at the store, and this was Circuit City, by the way, God rest their souls. And so we were looking at this stuff, and one of my co-managers said, last night I'm so tired. I was up so late. I was on this computer in, like Norway or something. And I was like, wait, what? What do you mean you were on a computer in Norway? What does that even mean? And so as he started to explain this, I was like, that sounds interesting. And so at the time I had, I believe, an AOL account, right? And so as I started to poke around and investigate this, I was no stranger to computers. I'd kind of been on computers and had done some basic programming back when I was in junior high. And this is when it was an Apple IIe, Apple IIc, if anybody's old enough to remember that. And so I'd done some programming, so I was no stranger to it. And as I was poking around AOL, I found out there was this thing for everyone who's got an AOL account called web space. And if you had an AOL account, you automatically had this stuff called web space. And what was cool is you could upload these things called web pages, and people within the AOL community could visit them with these really long web addresses, right? And so I was I looked at it, and then all of a sudden it hit me. I said, oh my God, you could make money with this. And so I started selling stuff through these web pages, and it was all how to work from home, information kind of stuff. And so that just kind of really lit a fire, because when I launched that first page, I didn't know how to do it. So I found a guy through the AOL community, and he wanted to charge me $50 to do it. And at the time, $50 was a lot of money to me. I had to ask my wife, hey, can I spend $50 on? And so she let me, God bless her. And so I upload the page, and there it is. And I got literally checks coming in the physical mail, and then I would send physical mail out, printed packets. It wouldn't even be emailed to people. It was these printed packets, how to work from home kind of stuff. And then one day I was like, man, I want to change this page. I want to add some more products. I want to do some other things. And I was like, oh, this guy's going to want $50 again, right? And so that's when I said, you know what, I know how to program from back in the day. Let me crack open this file. And I could see the words. I changed the words. I uploaded it, and voila, the page changed. And I was forever hooked, right? I was forever addicted to this medium called the internet. And so fast forward, I started learning how to web program. I built flat file databases. I eventually built my own content management system. I had worked for various companies during this time. And along the way, I was getting better and better and better at web development. Again, I had built my own content management system from the ground up. And so I kept threatening myself that I was going to go out and do this on my own. And all the while, this was really my side hustle. I worked for another company, and I wasn't even doing web development for that company. I was actually in marketing. And I kept saying, I'm going to go out on my own, Well, lo and behold, that company gave me the violent shove I needed, because I was working remote for them at the time, and they wanted all remote employees to come back. They were kind of done with the remote employee thing. This was long before anybody was really comfortable with that. And I was like, well, I'm living here in San Diego now. I don't want to move back to where I was from. This is kind of the violent shove I needed. So it's from that point on that I kind of started my own business. I mean, I kind of already been had my own business, and I had a couple of clients, but it was that point where I said, I got to now feed the family, with these hands right here. I got to do it. I've been threatening that I'm going to do this. So I did. So I went out on my own and, got my first clients by making cold calls, going and knocking on doors, and just trying to find people who needed what I did. Along the journey, I decided that my long-term vision was to have more of a full service marketing agency. So we expanded services beyond web development. We started doing branding. I developed a methodology around branding, started doing, video production. We really expanded our scope till it got to the point one day, and we can go deeper into the troubles of this when you're a small business, but it got to the point where we were just doing too much for a small company. And we really started to look for an improved business model, one that was based on recurring services, one that wasn't so broad, but mostly the recurring services was the driving nature. So we did that, partnered with a company called HubSpot. If those of you are familiar with a company called HubSpot, partnered with them, and then did that for a few years. And then it got to be to where at one point I was looking around the industry and said, you know what, this industry is really growing up. The industry prior to that had mostly been filled with a lot of small-time thinkers, small-time players, but what we were competing for, we were starting to compete against people who had finally grown up in the business and turned it into real businesses, and they had real teams and they had real workforces behind them. And it was becoming a liability to not be able to compete on that level. And that was really probably the biggest impetus for the desire to look for a merger partner. And I had known Julien for probably a couple of years before this thought came about. But I rekindled some conversations with Julien, and so here we are today. We can go deeper into how the merger went, and what guided it, and whatnot. But that's kind of my story. I've been self-taught on pretty much everything. If we go real far back, prior to my my computer days, when I first started out, I was in the military for a short period of time. Went in right after high school into the Marine Corps, and was just kind of antsy. I couldn't sit in a classroom. I couldn't do anything. I just had to get to doing something. And so the Marine Corps was it for me. And after that, then I realized, okay, I got to get back to my entrepreneurial roots. I got to be, feeling business again. And so that kind of led me on the journey that got me to where I am today.
I will interject with one question. I'm curious if you think that COVID-19 maybe has created some violent pushes, right? Maybe this has created some space for people for that side hustle to grow a little bit. Or what would you say to somebody thinking about, really launching that business right now?
There's limited opportunity right now. So if you just go to basic supply and demand, right? That kind of puts a limiter on everything. That being said, there's always demand for those that innovate, regardless of what the traditional supply and demand looks like. So you kind of had two forces there. You have two dynamics. You have traditional supply and demand, which is just going to naturally create limited opportunities. You also have massive disruption right now. You have money that's not flowing like it once was, and energy that's not flowing. Look, a lot of the markets are about energy and attitude, right? So energy is low, attitudes are down. That by itself is going to affect the flow of the whole system. So you have that you're dealing with, plus just the physical limited opportunities. But what I would say is innovation is always in high demand, right? Hustle is always in high demand. Getting out there and kicking butt is always in high demand. So regardless of your situation, if you're going to take the entrepreneurial route or you're going to work for a business, there's always an opportunity. Right now, the biggest challenge that we're facing is that for those of us that can innovate, it's great, right? Just tighten your belt, get scrappy, grit your teeth, put up your fists, and let's go, because it's kind of a battle out there right now. The sad byproduct of that is there are just going to be some people and a lot of businesses that just don't make it for a number of reasons. They just couldn't find their opportunity. There just wasn't enough of it, or they just didn't have the right mindset and grit to push through, or maybe they were behind a bunch of debt and a bunch of obligations that just couldn't allow them. So there's definitely a lot of unfortunate things happening here. I won't get into my opinions on certain things related to that, because we could get pretty heated real fast. But the net effect is that lots of challenges, but always a great time to innovate, always a great time to hustle.
Yeah, I would say in our industry in particular, it's one of those industries that's technically pretty easy to get into, but not easy to scale and grow and be successful. You could take a weekend course. There's all kinds of free courses. HubSpot offers them, Google offers them. So you can quickly become kind of an expert. with free resources, and you really have no startup costs since it's all digital. If you're, like Frank said, if you're scrappy and innovative and you can spin up a website and do some other things, but it becomes very difficult to find good opportunities and also to scale a business properly once you grow beyond just yourself. But I was going to just take one quick step back. I realized we kind of just jumped right into our stories, but didn't even really like introduce ourselves, like what our positions are, what our company is. So I just wanted to take a quick minute to take a quick step backwards. Frank and I are business partners. We own a digital marketing agency called Digitopia. If you haven't had a chance to check out our website, it's digitopia.agency. Frank and I have both had agencies for 10 plus years. I used to have an agency called organicseo.com, and Frank had an agency called elevator.com. And I'm the chief culture officer, managing our team for the most part and driving culture. And Frank is our CEO, and he also heads up sales as well. So with that said, I can tell you a little bit maybe about the merger story, and then I'll hand it over to you, Frank, to finish up. But just to kind of wanted to share a few of the reasons that we did merge. So at Organic SEO, my company was what I would say very focused on what we call top of the funnel digital marketing. So we did a lot of SEO and traffic and awareness campaigns. And we didn't have the bottom of the funnel component, whereas Frank's agency was much more focused on bottom of the funnel. They had email marketing, CRM management. They were HubSpot Platinum Tier partner already. So that was one of the reasons, just to be able to have a more full funnel digital marketing offering for our clients. But also there's just a lot of inherent issues and bottlenecks as you grow and reach a certain size. So currently we're at 17 or 18 full-time employees. But when you get to that 10, 15 plus employee size, things start to get increasingly complex, and you have to start recreating business systems and, like I said, create a layer of middle management and some other aspects. So we recognized that through some conversations, we could save on some of those costs that each of us were going to have, regardless of whether we were a 10 or 15 person company or a 20 or 30 person company. So we were able to, after we merged, move into one office, share that expense, one finance director that does our finances, one office admin. So there's a lot of kind of core functions that need to be and hats that need to be worn at any size business. When you're very small, you're wearing all of those hats. And so we recognize just the value of coming together and growing something bigger together and being able to scale quicker. So, Frank, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just go back to, when, if I look at the catalyst as to why, the original idea was explored, there were a couple of big things that stood out to me. I mentioned it earlier, the ability to compete in the marketplace. I'm someone who likes to win. When I go into the sales meetings, I want to win. I take pride in that. I don't want anyone to beat me. And when I go up against people that, have more resources and have more muscle behind them, like that frustrates me, because I can do, so much fancy talking and create connections and bonds with people and the whole like and trust thing. We can do that, but at the end of the day, the product has to be, very competitive. And so that certainly didn't sit well with me. So I wanted to do something to fast track that, and joining forces with Julien allowed us to put together a much more powerhouse team. So that was one of the driving reasons. The other one was actually around our people. And, if you look at, being a small company, and there's a lot of pros to that. There's a lot of really great things to being a small company, lots of flexibility, lots of autonomy, great culture and whatnot. The downside is that there's not a whole lot of upward mobility for the people that you might bring on your team when you're small. And so as I looked at my team and starting to realize that if we wanted to compete at a high level, that meant we had to bring on people that had more experience, had more talent. They were going to be more expensive to hire. And we wanted to invest more into their employment experience. And if working at our company meant that they're going to kind of be there for a few years and they're kind of where they're going to be and there's nowhere else to go, that was going to be a detriment to us. That was going to hurt the product, which would then hurt our ability to compete in the marketplace. And as I said, I like to win. And so it just made sense to give our great people the opportunity to grow. And so, I know going into it, at least I was willing, and I know Julien was too, but really willing to kind of put egos aside and as I said it, in the very beginning, pretty much almost anything was on the table in terms of company name and this and that, because the ultimate goals were to bring our clients the best product possible and give our employees the ability to grow. And it was through that I felt that the third stakeholder in all of that, which are shareholders and profit, I felt that would be a byproduct, that shareholder or that stakeholder would benefit, take care of the client, take care of the employee, the shareholder, which is the third piece in that triangle, which was myself, right? Like myself and Julien, that's the shareholder side. And so I believe those two things will take care of the shareholder side. And that brings up another point that I think is really interesting that I would encourage anyone to do if you start a business, is to remember what hat you're wearing. And so when I speak about the shareholder, yes, I'm talking about myself and my business partners, but when I'm in the business, I'm talking about my responsibility, my fiduciary responsibility to that shareholder group, because I may not be the CEO one day. Julien may not be the chief culture officer. We may not be employees, but we may be shareholders. Or if the company were to ever sell, like, it's our job to be good stewards of this entity, so that way whoever cares for it next, is taking on something that's healthy and viable. And so that's not only a legal responsibility, but it's just a moral responsibility. And so I think one of the things that we try to do a good job of, and they probably get tired of me saying this, but I have to remind people, like, what kind of discussion are we having? And we work very hard to not have shareholder discussions inside the business. When we're in the business, we're employees with very specific jobs. And so that kind of mentality, I think, is what drives what we do and how we've handled the merger.
And then I think the last area where I'd love to hear you guys talk about, and then maybe I know there's already some questions coming in, is about the certified B Corp. I think that's really interesting aspect of your business, and it's something that we do teach on with the students in their CSR class. So maybe you could talk about that choice and why you go forward with that.
I'm just messing around with this poll feature and functionality that I've never used. So did that show up on everybody's screen? Sweet. It's working. Cool. Okay, so it sounds like about 40% of you guys don't know what a B Corp is. So I'll just, it's half and half. So I'll explain a little bit. But Organic SEO actually became a B Corp, one of the first B Corps in San Diego, almost 6 or 7 years ago now. I think at the time there were 5 B Corps in San Diego. Now there's maybe 25 or 30. Really, though, when I found out about B Corps, it was very much in line with our core values and our mission as a company already. So I thought that it would be a very easy process. But to be a certified benefit corporation, you have to adhere by higher level of transparency and some additional standards legally. You have to be a for-profit business. And it's governed by a body called the B Lab, which is up in San Francisco. So you go through like a 400 question process. They audit all of your answers. They require documentation on how things are done. It was not an easy process. And looking back, I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad that it's as difficult as it is, because it's not just something that you can pay for and slap a label on your website. Some of the biggest brands that people know of that are B Corps are Patagonia and Etsy. They're some of the pioneers in the space. But really, it's kind of founded on the principle of people, planet, and profit, and having an equal focus on all those components, recognizing that government isn't going to be, the organization or entity that fixes our environmental and social problems. That business has to be a force for good and not something that's detracting from society. So B Corp, it resonated really closely with me, and that was a really strong component of the merger as well. We recognized that we wanted to focus as a company on where we could provide value, helping to support the growth of cause and purpose-driven brands to the extent that we can, but also just supporting people. And so making sure that we're fostering community and growing our people both personally and professionally on an ongoing basis. So it's something that we really value, and it's also just been a great community to be a part of. So maybe we jump in. That said, maybe we could jump into a couple other questions here that were asked. There's a couple questions that are very similar. Frank, I'll let you answer this one. How do you balance customizing services for clients with scaling? And then how do you keep up with that scale and create processes in the business that help with the changing nature of the industry?
Oh, wow. This is like a very big loaded question here. So what I found...
I was going to say, I think we should definitely, hit on EOS and how helpful the Entrepreneur's Operating System business management methodology has been, and maybe talk a little bit about Zoho and how we use that as a tool.
Yeah, specifically from the product side of things or your offerings. So in the agency space, or I would just say in the marketing space, it's one of the more rapidly changing spaces on the planet when it comes to offerings and service delivery. As such, almost every agency I've ever talked to suffer from frustration around how much change takes place to not only the tech and what works and what doesn't, but just the structuring of their offerings. It seems like every 6 months there's a need to kind of tinker with the offerings. It's just a nature of the beast that is not fun. And it certainly makes it difficult to scale. So what we've done is we've worked on our positioning as a way to kind of combat that. We've worked on this idea that, most professional service firms are selling what I call the hands rather than the way. And so what we've done is we've developed a methodology, we've developed a framework that we teach to people through content, through podcasts, through videos, through a book. And from that, we want that to be the basis of the conversation. So that way, when we get sales opportunities, we have a better chance that people are buying that way rather than just hitting us up as a marketing agency to hire our hands. So that's one of the things that we've done to create a massive difference in our sales process and the experience our team has with our clients. I can't underscore that enough, that when selling professional services, it's really critical to understand who you're for, the major problem you're solving, and then your methodology to solve that problem, and really invest a lot of time and effort into defining that methodology and the brand around that methodology, the vernacular around that methodology. That will definitely create a different sales conversation for you. So that's one thing that we've done to do that, because otherwise scaling professional services is not an easy thing to do. No two clients are alike. You're dealing with a lot of information-based stuff. It's not a widget that you can just stamp out. So that becomes very difficult. But again, the more you can hone in on an audience type, a specific problem and a specific outcome you drive, and a way you do it, and focus there, your conversations will be different. So that'll do a world of good for you. The other thing we do is we try to standardize everything we do, from the sales process, the number of steps. We name each step. There's a deck or a template for each step. We have scripts for it. We train on it. We measure it. And then in terms of how we sell it. And so what we do is we have pre-scoped line items in our CRM for our major service offering. And so now when it's time to sign with a client, we're able to export a statement of work out of our CRM. This is, of course, after we've done the fancy proposals and the conversations. When they say, yes, I want to do business with you and give me a contract, we can now export that out of our CRM pretty quickly and easily. We don't have to develop custom scope almost ever anymore. And that's been a massive game changer, especially when it comes to being a marketing kind of company and doing professional service. It's a massive game changer. So standardizing scopes, I would highly recommend, if you're in professional services. Narrowing what you do is always going to be good for scale, of course, narrowing audiences and the scope of what you do. So those would be my recommendations there. And then at a higher level, when it comes to just managing the firm at large, Julien mentioned something called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's a methodology or framework that's taught in a book called Traction by a gentleman named Gino Wickman. Highly recommend you read it. It's a simplified framework for how to manage the business from an entrepreneurial mindset. It in itself is a framework, right? So if you were to ever do business with Gino Wickman's company, you're not hiring Gino and his people to just come do general consulting with you. You're hiring them to implement their way. So we follow a very similar approach with what we do. And so with that program, or with that methodology, that framework, they have rhythms for how you run your weekly meetings. They have rhythms for how you do your quarterly and annual process. They have an approach for defining your scorecard and how you measure the business. And so being true to that process allows the business to run with as little chaos as possible. It's been said that businesses are always in a state of chaos. The degree to which determines its success. And so if you just understand that chaos is a natural part of business, your job is to create systems and process to where the chaos is minimized. So that way you can have some sanity and clarity. Because if you don't, then managing the business becomes a very emotional endeavor, which is never a good place to run a business from. So hopefully that helped.
So I'm going to ask, oh, Mike had a question. Go ahead, Mike, I'll let you go.
Benefit corporation that is probably early on trying to get as much business as possible, but given what you just said about focus, how did you find the niche or the target market that aligns with that focus so that you can do work that is meaningful, that you can grow, that's not a focus that's not too limiting? What was the process of defining that target market of who you want to pursue as your customer base?
So as Digitopia sits today, we're not actively looking for clients that have purpose specifically. Our B Corp mantra and our B Corp values are more so about the kind of company we want to create and the kind of value we want to create for our employees and the kind of good we want to do, from that. Our actual target market focus as Digitopia are mid-sized B2B organizations. So organizations that are anywhere from 5 to 50 million in revenue. And if we want to really hone in on a sweet spot, it's 10 to 20 million in revenue. Ideally, we're dealing with some sort of C-level executive, whether it's a GM, a president, a CEO, COO. That's our ideal contact at the organization.
And I will say, to the extent that we can, we absolutely, we want to support and help grow, purpose-driven brands or businesses that are really focused on building culture and building people. So that's kind of the people component that we are really grabbing onto for both ourselves and the types of businesses that we would want to work with. Earlier on, when it was organic, the focus and the niche was all mostly natural products and consumer packaged goods. And that niche is ripe with a lot of B Corps. So I don't think that you can ever necessarily be too narrow. I mean, I think that's usually the mistake that people make, is they go too broad and fear of missing out on opportunity. But it's very rare that I hear of a business that didn't succeed because their focus was too narrow and specific.
And I introduced saying Frank had done a field experience, but you did too. And didn't they focus on that? Wasn't it looking at that niche for you when it was organic SEO, the MBA students?
Yeah. Yes.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So my question was going to be, I think it's really interesting that you guys merged two agencies, and I'm curious for you, what was the hardest part of that? I mean, being two people who were autonomous, got to make the decisions, got to do everything sort of independently. What was the hardest part as you guys came together?
I'll let Julien answer that, because maybe he can complain about me. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, Frank, you want to drop it? No, I mean, honestly, Frank had a really cool way of actually kind of going through the process of evaluating the merger. Something that I had thought about and kind of wished that I had after a few years of, doing it by myself and trying to wear all the hats. And so when he approached me, it was really exciting. But he had this, kind of like the way we do everything, everything's a process and a methodology and a framework. And so he actually had a framework, I think, that he had kind of been working through with a mentor of his to build out for, what specific steps are we going to take in evaluating a company that we would merge with. And, within those first few steps, we're going to sit down in a room together. We're going to kind of hash out what our core values are personally and professionally to see if we're aligned there. going to talk about our short-term and our long-term vision. We're going to take a really close look at all the resources that we each have as companies separately, and where we could potentially like save money and time by merging. Look at each person individually on the team, the skill sets, do a SWOT analysis. So we went through it step by step through a series of 5-6 meetings over the course of about 6 months. At first I honestly didn't necessarily hold out a ton of hope that it was going to happen, and much to my surprise, things kept falling in places, and I'm just really glad that we did it in that way, because early on I had a very quick experience with a business partner. We partnered up because we were friends, and it quickly became very lopsided, and I was the one doing all the work because I had the technical skill sets, and we hadn't really talked specifically about who was going to do manage each aspect of the business and where it had, and so in this way of doing it, I think that we really both learned a lot, and we kind of went into it with eyes wide open, understanding how we could grow better together. Frank, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it was a really cool process. I really enjoyed it. It kind of played to the areas of business I like to play in, putting deals together, systems, process. As Julien mentioned, I worked with my mentor on a process. I think what made it successful is just really the people involved. I mean, you can kind of follow any process you want, but the people are going to make or break it. And I think if I talk to most of my entrepreneur friends, most would say, don't take on partners, don't merge and bring on new partners, don't do that. Partnerships are a disaster. Like, this is what I commonly hear from other entrepreneurs. And I have to remind them, when they say things like, oh, partnerships suck, I have to remind them, like, well, you were one of the partners that sucked, right? Like, keep that in mind. Like, it's not just like, oh, partners suck. It's like, you don't do well in partnerships is what I have to remind people of. And that's just the reality of it, is most people don't do well in partnerships. That's just the nature of it. And so I've always done well in partnerships. But I know that it takes very unique, special people to make it work. And so first and foremost, when I was looking for companies that I could possibly have this conversation with, look, I know a lot of agency owners in this space, and I could count on one hand the number of people I was willing to have that conversation with, Julien being one of them, because I knew first and foremost, they had to be special people at heart, because otherwise it's not going to work. And so I led with that. And as I mentioned earlier, I was willing to drop ego and put a lot of things on the table and forego a lot of things. I only had a couple of very minor requirements, being the one who was pursuing these conversations with people. And because of that, because I didn't have this laundry list of requirements, and Julien didn't either, we were able to put it together. And so it worked well. And through that process, it's worked well. Has it been disagreement free? No, not at all. But the ones we've had have been really, really minor and solved over a margarita. I mean, and it's been that simple, which is really, really rare. And I think it speaks well to the process we went through, because again, I think those disagreements tend to escalate bigger than what they actually are in partnerships, because there's ego involved, right? And there's emotion involved. And so I think just laying the groundwork up front, if you're at all considering doing a partnership or a merger, it's really critical. And I think you also have to look in the mirror and ask, like, what kind of emotional intelligence do I have? Like, how well am I willing to kill my ego every day? And that is a daily process, and it takes a commitment to that to make it work and make it happen.
I think Dee has a question, and then if you guys students want to chime in and ask their questions, or if you want to put your question in chat, either way, we have a few more minutes left. I think a few more questions.
Cool. So we've got a question around, did you look at this as a franchise model? Is that why it's so process-based in finding the partners? We didn't
No.
necessarily expect that it would be a franchise, but I mean, by all means, I think the reason franchises are successful is because they have such a mapped out process and standard operating procedures. And so to the extent that we can do the same thing, we want to follow suit because that's what's going to allow us to create scale. And so, you know, now that we've gone through this merger once, you know, we're definitely open to the idea of merging with, you know, and acquiring other businesses. And we've got a whole process around how we'll do that. And it'll be a lot quicker and easier next time. So everything we do, and that is kind of our whole methodology. Everything we do is a system in order to be able to create scale.
Yeah, Julien brings up a great point. It's part of our core strategic language is that, you know, we're kind of obsessed with this idea of systems. And so to Julian's point, everything we do is going to be a systematic approach. And if we do, you know, want to look at other organizations down the road, we have an approach for how to do it now. My 2 cents would be we would probably only acquire, because I don't think we need additional partners in the mix with the 4 partners that we have. Even I recognize there's a limit to that, and the more partners you add, you start to create exponential, you know, possibilities for difficulty. But yeah, to Julian's approach, we didn't exactly, or to his comment, we didn't exactly specifically look at franchises per se, but it certainly follows a similar kind of mentality.
So actually, I have 2 questions. One I ask Julien every time I see him, just about. But the first question I want to ask is, you spoke about innovation earlier, and the importance of innovation, certainly as it relates to this current economic environment. So what are you guys doing right now to adjust or innovate around your business model as it exists, you know, in this new and, you know, the upcoming kind of future economic situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Frank chime in on this because he's really been helping to spearhead this. But I mean, in short, we've just jumped in headfirst to create content to help people out in any way that we can. Frank's been doing a ton of webinars, we've been providing a lot of free resources. We've gone all in on our marketing efforts. But yeah, Frank, you want to tell them a little more specifically what you've been doing over the last month or 2?
Yeah, and I apologize. I had family walking in, you know, the work from home thing now. Yeah, so, you know, when this whole thing went down, when the whole panic started and then, you know, businesses started shutting down, all of a sudden it was like a light switch, right? Like money stopped flowing, clients were canceling. When that whole thing started, you know, there was definitely plenty of fear. And there were daily conversations, if not multiple times per day, because it seemed like information was changing by the hour. But once that initial, you know, we let that fear ride out and we regrouped, I started to gain a certain amount of enthusiasm and an excitement. And it was a really weird feeling because it's juxtaposed against probably the craziest thing that anyone alive has ever experienced in terms of business. And so that was a really weird sensation for me that I was like just sitting with and grappling with, like, you know, I'm feeling this excitement and enthusiasm. Is it right? Where's this coming from? And so I started to realize that a lot of the things that we had been talking about doing for the past 6 months prior to, you know, this kicking off a couple of months ago, there were a lot of things that we had wanted to do and talked about doing that I realized we're going to take quite a while and take some time to implement, but this particular time period actually gave us an opportunity to just step on the gas. Like the mentality, in my opinion, was, what do we have to lose? There's literally nothing to lose. And in fact, you know, if we want to be able to survive what's on the quote unquote other side, we damn sure better be an amazing company. We better have an offering that people just can't do without. And so those refinements, in my opinion, it made it a perfect time to step on the gas and roll up our sleeves and work harder than ever. I remember for the first probably month or so of you know, the whole panic and everything setting in, I think I was working 7 days a week, you know, just nonstop, because there were so many things that, you know, we were trying to regroup around and move forward and refine. So I'm happy to say that those projects are now fully kicked in. We're moving things forward. Our offering has been refined in an amazing way. We've made changes in our sales conversations and what we're presenting. We've made refinements in our offering, in our CRM. We're training the team, getting them involved. We're getting their input. They're helping shape it. We're also able to introduce a new offering as a result of this that will allow people to engage with what we have to teach without necessarily doing business directly with our firm. And so we're essentially building our offering around the journey of our buyers, because it's not just binary in the marketplace. It's not that you have people who aren't buyers and then they are buyers. They go through this whole progression. And so we're ensuring that our business model can be there during that progression that they go through, even if they're not able to hire our firm one-to-one. And so I'm kind of proud of the fact that we're making some very, very big moves right now. We're investing into the business specifically with hires to help build some things out that otherwise we wouldn't have done, or we would have had to bootstrap it. It would have taken a very long time. I'm just somebody who wants to step up to the plate and face it. You know, I'm not looking for the walk. Like, let's take the at bat. And right now, like, you know, this is a massive challenge that we're all up against. So I'm just really proud of the fact that we are innovating in such a big way during this time. So to answer your question, yes, we're innovating like mad right now.
That's excellent. That's really, really awesome. And so second question, and I asked this to Julien, Frank, you can ask too, but I know Julien, one thing that I admire about Julien, the years that I've known him, he's a prolific reader. He's a prolific researcher. He's always trying to develop new, and he always gives me a book, something that I need to read. So Julien and Frank, you can hop in here too. What are you reading right now, Julien, that you think is beneficial, or it could, you know, of any sort?
That's kind of funny. Right now, I'm actually reading Frank's book called The Digital Utopia Methodology.
There you go. Look at that.
It just came out, and I'm rereading it just to make sure that I'm familiar with the content. There it is, right there. There's a ton of great books that I'm continually like picking back up. One of my favorites, a little more finance specific, but called Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. That's always been absolutely one of my favorites to kind of simplify and demystify, you know, understanding how to structure a business financially and like what targets to try to shoot for and what profitability to shoot for, things like that. So that's a great book. Really early on, when I was trying to do it all myself, I read the E-Myth, and that was like transformational for me at the time, to recognize a few things that I was doing wrong. Scaling Up is the book Frank mentioned, which is all about Entrepreneur's operating system, which is a great book. There's also one called Rocket Fuel, which is kind of the similar storytelling component of how EOS can work well for a business. Yeah, good to great. There's tons of them. Frank, what are your favorites?
Favorites. Wow, so many. So Positioning, Reese and Trout, Purple Cow, Godin, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Was that Carnegie, right? Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah.
Some more modern stuff. Hopefully you're going to buy my book, buildingyourdigitalutopia.com. Go there, check it out. One of my favorite books, it's not on business, but just on like this apparatus that we have here in our skull and inside of us, is called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Probably one of the most life-changing books I've ever read. I recently read Inbound Organization, Marketing Made Simple is another one I just wrapped up. And right now I'm listening to The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. That was awesome.
Yeah. So Megan had a question for me about giving back to the community and asking if I mentor young agency owners at all. Actually do quite a bit of that, and so does Frank. So that's something that I've always been really passionate about, is helping other businesses, just because I think both Frank and I kind of nerd out on the business of business and how to structure a business and how to scale a business. And there's so many resources and people willing to help out there. You know, after both of us tapped into the organization I mentioned, EO, or Entrepreneurs Organization, that's meant for businesses of a certain size, but there's all kinds of groups of people that are willing to, at the drop of a hat, go have coffee with you, help you with your problems as you scale. And everybody, no matter what type of business it is, goes through the same difficulties as they start to hire employees and figure out how to offer benefits and, upgrade their CRM and figure out how to transition from FreshBooks to QuickBooks and, just all these things that pretty much everyone's going to experience at some point or another. But also for me, I head up, besides culture, I'm also doing quite a bit of business development. And one of our best referral partners is other agencies, both in giving and getting referrals. So, our industry as a whole, I would say, is very cooperative. We call it, instead of competition, we call it co-opetition. Like, everybody is helping each other because there's plenty of business to go around. And as long as you have a niche, you can align yourselves with other agencies that do, PR, web design and development, social media management, all those types of things that we mostly don't do. And even if we do have a little bit of crossover, usually we have a different focus or different persona, a different industry that we focus on, and different size businesses that we'll focus on. So there's plenty of opportunities that come our way. Probably 80% of the leads that we get aren't a good fit for us for one reason or another. And so I have made it a point to have a great book of really trustworthy referral partners that I can send in order to make sure that we're helping people that come to us and pointing them in the right direction, and vice versa by helping other smaller agencies at times. Sometimes they'll come across an opportunity. It might be a big established company that's got an in-house marketing and sales team that's on HubSpot and needs to drive more qualified sales opportunities to their sales team. And that might, they might be a small social media management company, and they really don't have any business trying to manage HubSpot or do something outside of social media. So that could be a perfect opportunity for us, and vice versa. If we get a small brick and mortar mom and pop shop that needs help managing social media and probably at a pretty low price point, then I can refer business to those people all day long. So I'm always looking to build relationships within the industry and help people out in any way we can. Cool.
I just wanted to,
yeah,
I was going to say, I forgot 3 books. I can't believe I forgot these, and you need to write these down. E-Myth, which I believe Julien mentioned. Uncommon Service, hands down one of the most amazing books. And then that book that I mentioned earlier, Traction. But E-Myth, Uncommon Service will absolutely help you nail your your brand promises. Like, what are the core brand promises or your product promises? And they do so beautifully, by the way, in that book. Francis Fry, and I forget the other author.
Cool. What other questions do you guys have? How long did we have, by the way? Are we supposed to wrap up by 5? Jamie, I just unmuted you.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, she's
Sorry to you. Okay. Thank you.
Frank, Linda's asking, did you get most of your technical training from the Marines?
Technical. I assume you mean technical as it comes to like programming and web and whatnot. Is that what you mean by that, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I'm self-taught on that. So if I, go back to when I was, I want to say like junior high, right? Like 7th grade, 8th grade. I had a computer. It was an Apple IIc, and I had a class then and some friends who were also nerds, and just learned how to program in AppleSoft Basic. And I did that for a little while. And then through my high school time frame, I used the early thing that would later be known as the internet to find out how to do reports much faster. So I wasn't using it for anything business or programmery. And then later, like when I got in my 20s and I was, you know, a working adult, and that's when I, you know, discovered the information superhighway, and that's when I jumped in. And so what I did was I just kind of first started looking at HTML code from those pages I was buying from this guy, and I just saw how to manipulate. And so I just would cruise around the internet and find different tutorials. And then when I really got into true programming and I built my content management system, I bought 1 or 2 books on the subject of programming in a specific language. And between that and all the like available resources on the internet of examples of code and what things mean, I just taught myself. And you know, I would just code my brains out till like 4 in the morning because it was so fun and addicting.
You want to win, don't you, Frank? You want to win.
I do. It's a disease sometimes.
Let's follow up on that. 2 ambitious people who want to grow a business. You've merged together. You put your egos aside and had a short list of I must-haves as you negotiated this merger. What systems or what groups of people, how do you keep yourself accountable to stay healthy personally and as a partnership in light of obvious ambitions and desires to grow and to become something more?
We have life insurance policies on each other, so we don't really care about Just kidding. That's a good question. I mean, for the accountability as it relates to business, for sure, EOS has been the thing that absolutely helps us stay in line. You know, part of EOS is having what they call a quarterly rock, which is your big quarterly project or focus for each person individually. And we check in on that each week in our what we call our level 10 meeting. And we give each other status updates, and each quarter we present what next quarter's project is going to be. We have an issues list. We have all aspects of that whole program really help create clarity and insight into what each person's doing and measurement around, you know, both not only our KPIs, but also our KPAs, our key performance activities of what each person's doing each and every day in order to drive proper KPIs and goals that we want to hit as a company.
Yeah, I would say echo what Julien said in terms of, you know, being healthy. I'll just go back to, as a team and as a partnership, I would just go back to something I said earlier, which is just making sure everyone understands the job they have as an employee of the company and their mission in that role. And so each area leader has a 1-sentence, very simple mission statement. And it's the reminder of like what they're supposed to be doing. So I really try to emphasize that, you know, we shouldn't group decision make a lot of the decisions, right? We shouldn't like group think it. Whoever's in charge of that area, like we need to, you know, let that person make those decisions and run with it. And if they decide to enlist the opinion of other people, great. But really try to emphasize that each area has a mission. They have KPIs in that area, and we're there to support each other. But above and beyond that, like avoiding kind of like this group decision making, you know, have everything be a vote thing is something that I'm really against. And I think that does create a healthier, stronger team because, you know, everyone needs to be able to know, like, no, this is my area, I'm making this call. Like, I don't need to go talk to everybody and get everyone's input and approval on it. So I think that's really important. And then, you know, I think the other side of that too is that as shareholders that work in the business, there's just a level of commitment that goes along with it that isn't, it doesn't always meet this like perfect idea of balance, right? Like I think if we look at anybody who's accomplished anything big and massive, and I'm not saying that's what it has to be for you or anyone in business, you don't necessarily have to go to like the biggest, most massive success you could find. But I think if we look at examples of very big, massive success, there really is very little balance, so to speak. It's kind of an obsession. So I think everyone deals with that in their own way, and each of the 4 partners has their own level of that they have. Speaking for me personally, like I always have to tone back the obsession because I do get obsessed. So, but to me, that's part of the enjoyment of it. Like I just love what I do. It's not a job or anything like that. So I have to like sometimes check myself against like, oh, okay, I actually have a family I'm supposed to pay attention to and whatnot. So I think just giving each other that kind of autonomy and feedback and being in good communication with each other helps.
Andy, you had a question around lessons learned from creating company culture. One that comes to mind is a few years ago, I thought I had created good company culture. I had a cool office down on Cedros Avenue in Solana Beach. We had like kind of a warehouse style office and a ping pong table and games and all kinds of, you know, like fun things in the office. And at the time, that's kind of more so what I thought culture was, and realized there was a little bit of like some backlash from the team, just not getting enough like support. And so I realized company culture is by no means, you know, fun and games in the office. And it's a little bit of that, but for the most part, it's about fulfillment and the team feeling like they're always growing personally and professionally, and they have clarity around what their objectives and their accountabilities are. And so for me, that's the primary focus: connection with people, and helping to ensure that I'm supporting everybody to grow personally and professionally.
Okay. So we're kind of right on time right now at 5 o'clock. Do you want to? I know there's additional questions here in the chat box, but I don't want to take advantage of your time. Maybe just some couple of closing comments and questions, maybe related to what you see there, Julien, on the chat box, or just to close this out for this afternoon.
I like Nick's question here. Any regrets? Yeah, man. I mean, I think that's one of the things. Like, if you decide to be a business owner, I think it requires handling failure, disappointment, regrets really, really well. Like, I think having a very short memory and little to no attachment to those things is a huge value add, because, you know, if you're gonna have success of any kind, whether it's business or not, it just requires lots of reps. It requires lots of at-bats, right? It just requires doing it a lot. And when you do it a lot, especially things that you've never done before, which in business, you're constantly presented with that, you're going to fail a lot. There's going to be a lot of things that just don't work. And I think, yeah, so with that, you get regrets and you get disappointments. But for me, you know, I look at it in terms of like, well, if I were to tell myself some things, you know, if I could talk to myself, you know, 10, 15 years ago, what would I tell myself? Well, I would tell myself to focus more, not chase so many shiny objects. I would tell myself to go narrower with my audience and my offering, right? I would certainly tell myself some things that I believe have held things back from going faster. But certainly I don't wallow in that. I'm not like angry or upset about those failures. I'm not like disappointed, because I think I have a pretty healthy relationship with things that don't work. You know, I have to sometimes remind even my own partners of this, not Julien, one of my other partners. But I have to sometimes remind them, like, you can't point out that this effort didn't work, right? Like, you have to do 100 things and a couple of them will work, right? That's just the nature of trying to do something great. Is there going to be a lot of things that don't work. So I would say, if that's going to be you and you're going to try to, you know, whether it's climbing the ladder of success or you start your own thing, put in the reps, put in the time, and have lots of activity. And every now and then stop, look back, reflect, but don't stop moving. Don't stop acting, and don't start executing, even though there's going to be a lot of stuff that just doesn't work. It's going to feel like failure. Trust me, it'll feel like failure. I can tell you right now, like, there are plenty of people who look at us and say, oh, wow, you guys are really successful. But I could like pull out all the stories of like, oh my God, you have no idea. Like, I'm far from any sort of level of success in my mind. So you just have to be able to like deal with that and just know, like, that's just part of the game, and not let it affect, you know, who you are as a person. And that's something that I personally struggled with for many years is, you know, the roller coaster of the business was me, right? Like, when the business was up, I was up, and the business was down, I was down. So breaking that attachment is not easy to do. So that would probably be the thing I would recommend, is just look to like disassociate. The business is not you. And if the
Right.
business doesn't work in a particular quarter, it doesn't work in a particular year, it doesn't work at all, like that's not you.
Yep. Excellent. Julie, you want some closing comments, thoughts to leave us with?
Yeah, a lot of what Frank said is so important around like finding a niche. Like I said earlier, I don't think you can go too narrow. Focus and determination. I think it's the book Outliers. Malcolm Gladwell talks about like the 10,000 hour rule. You know, you can be like proficient in something within 25, 30 hours, but to really be a true expert in something, it's like 10,000 hours, which is, 5 years of full-time work. So it's so important to just not give up. Like you can't lose if you don't quit. So like there were so many times that I was so close to just completely throwing in the towel, and there's probably so many businesses that are massively successful that were on the brink of not making it. So I think that's just super important. And one thing that makes that easier is to keep your overhead low in the beginning, because if it's just you and your time, then it's easy not to have to throw in the towel. But if you ramp up and you scale up quickly and you've got a bunch of overhead and office space and a bunch of employees before you have stability, then it can get dicey pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point, Julien, especially when it comes to professional services. I think the big mistake with professional service firms, and we're guilty of it, right, is that the more skill sets required to deliver the solution, the more vulnerable you're going to be and the more difficult it is to scale up and scale down, right? So what I always tell people who are trying to grow a professional service firm is solve a particular problem with as few skill sets as possible, because that will scale up and down much easier.
Yeah.
But if it's like you do 17 different things, those people are going to be hard to repurpose into all the things. And so Julien brings up a great point, right? Like craft your solution such that it's delivered with as few skill sets as possible, but make sure they're the absolute best in the world, right? Like be the best in the world at a couple of things and put together a solution with those couple of skill sets. And you're going to have a much easier time.
Kind of reflects the in and out model, doesn't it? Really, in and out. Keep it simple.
Absolutely.
Keep it good. So that's actually, well, listen, what we're going to do, obviously it's always a good sign when we have a lot of questions and we go over time, but I just wanted, on behalf of Jamie, who's kind of lost some connections, and Carol and all the MBA people, we just want to thank you both for just an incredible hour. I know Julien, and I know you, Frank, as well, that ultimately you would offer your emails if we had additional questions. So I probably will hand that over to Carol if you'd want to collect some more questions. I'm sure Carol can take control of possibly sending you guys some questions, as I know you have plenty of time on your hands at home to possibly answer them. But anyway, just on behalf of Point Loma, the MBA program, and just for your time and ultimately my appreciation for the many years you guys contributed to Point Loma in my classes and other classes. We just thank you so much for this afternoon's time. So on that note,
I was just going to mention, Randall, I'm more than happy to jump on a quick coffee connect call with anybody that wants to chat or has a specific question. And I think that was kind of the last point that I was going to make, is the importance of relationships. And the reason Frank and I came together, met in the first place, was through an organization that we were part of and that I'm on the board of, and that, the importance of giving back in your community and building your community and being, hanging out with the right people. I just think that that's so fundamentally important to growing a business.
Yep. And that's why we love you guys, for sure. So, all right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Anything else, Jamie? Are we good? Double thumbs up, Jamie. He's lost the connection as well.
Awesome. Well, thank
Okay.
you. That was fun.
Thank you very much. Love
Thanks
you
for having
guys.
us, guys.
All righty.
Be safe.
Thank you, guys.
God bless you both.
See ya.
See you, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining, everybody.